What drives a man to climb onto a burning tank destroyer, knowing it could explode at any second, to face down an army alone? This is the story of a 19-year-old who weighed barely more than 100 pounds, yet performed one of the most extraordinary acts of courage in military history. By the time you reach the end of this tale, you'll understand that true strength has nothing to do with size. By late January 1945, the German army in the West was in serious trouble. Following the failure of Hitler's last offensive gamble in the Ardennes, the Allies were forcing German soldiers back out of France and threatening the border of the ever-shrinking Third Reich. The Nazis retained only one major foothold in France, with its vital bridges across the Rhine. This area was known as the Colmar Pocket. Desperate to retain this position, they launched fierce counterattacks to drive the Americans back. It was here, across these very fields, on the 26th of January 1945, that Lieutenant Audie Murphy would make one of the most remarkable one-man stands in the history of warfare. This is his incredible story. But who was this young lieutenant? And how did a boy from rural Texas end up alone on a battlefield, facing impossible odds? The answer begins years earlier, in the poorest corners of America. Born in rural Texas in 1925 to a poor farming family, Audie Murphy had always been a small boy. When he enlisted underage in the U.S. Army, aged just 17 in June 1942, his medical examination recorded he was just 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighing 112 pounds and of slender build. Most men would have been rejected for such measurements, but America was at war. His stature, combined with his boyish looks, earned him the nickname Baby during his training. Fellow soldiers looked at this kid and wondered how he'd survive basic training, let alone combat. But as the world would soon learn, what Audie lacked in physical presence, he more than made up for in courage and skill. Landing in North Africa in February 1943, he joined Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, and quickly came to the notice of his superiors as a quick-thinking soldier and a crack shot. The boy who'd been called Baby was about to prove he was anything but. In July, Murphy first went into action, landing in Sicily, Italy. This started a period of frontline combat, which would not end until May 1945. Constantly on the search for action, he was promoted to corporal by late July. He was with U.S. forces when they landed at Salerno, where he single-handedly charged and knocked out a German machine gun nest which had pinned down his platoon. By December, he was a sergeant and fighting in the Anzio bridgehead, where he destroyed a German tank and drove back an enemy attack, earning the Bronze Star in the process. Despite several bouts of illness, Murphy always refused to be evacuated to hospital. Once he had to be forcibly dragged to an aid station. What nobody expected was how quickly this young man would rack up an astonishing combat record. But his greatest test was still to come. Unsurprisingly, Murphy was soon back in the line, re-landing in France, this time as part of Operation Dragoon in August 1944. There he killed 2 snipers and knocked out another machine gun nest alone, earning the Distinguished Service Cross as a result. The pattern was becoming clear. Murphy didn't just fight. He fought like a man possessed. In October 1944, Murphy achieved the incredible feat of earning 2 Silver Stars in 3 days for fighting through German ambushes, personally killing and capturing several dozen men. These acts also earned him a rare battlefield commission, but they came at a severe cost. Shot in the hip by a sniper, he developed gangrene and was hospitalized for several months before discharging himself from hospital and rejoining his unit. The doctors protested. His body needed rest, but Murphy's mind was already back with his men. And so, by January 1945, Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy, who unbelievably was still only 19 years of age, and the men of Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, found themselves engaged in bitter fighting around the Colmar Pocket. They had been involved in heavy fighting to clear the Germans from the area in the previous days. Company's strength had been reduced from over 100 to only 40 men, with Murphy, who had once been a private in the same company, now commanding the unit. Little did they know, but they were directly in the path of an oncoming German counterattack. The stage was set for Murphy's date with destiny. But first, he had to position his men for what was about to become a nightmare scenario. Records tell us that the 30th Infantry Division, in which the 5th 10th served, were holding a position just outside the village of Holzwehr by the end of January. In the years after the war, the precise location was lost, though Murphy himself wrote a description which serves as a useful guide. With modern technology, we can clearly identify Murphy's U-shaped woods, the road from the wood to the village, and of course, the village itself. So it was here, along this tree line, that Murphy and his 40 men were located. Their chief armored support came in the form of 2 M10 tank destroyers, one of which was stationed on the road running from the woods through to Holzwehr, with the second some 40 yards ahead of the main line towards Holzwehr itself. These Wolverines, as they were nicknamed, would prove crucial in the coming battle. Murphy had selected a spot in the drainage ditch along the main road through the forest about 10 yards ahead of the rear tank destroyer as his command post. He was armed only with his M1 carbine, a pair of binoculars, a map, and a field telephone. It wasn't much, but it was all he needed. This location was made even more uncomfortable for the men of Company B for several reasons. First, the ground was so frozen, it was next to impossible to dig in. The men had to continually move about in the snow to prevent their feet from freezing. Second, the main U.S. support was around a mile in their rear, waiting for the arrival of fresh troops before moving up to reinforce the line. With Germans retaining hold of the northern end of Holzwehr village, some 400 yards away, these fields formed the de facto no man's land. Murphy was well aware of how precarious a situation this would be if the Germans launched a counterattack. He ordered his men to prepare a second defensive line several hundred meters further into the wood where better protection could be found. It was a wise decision. What Murphy feared most was about to materialize from the mist. What Murphy had most feared came true at 2 p.m. on the 26th of January, when the rumble of engines could be heard in Holzwehr. The sound was accompanied a few moments later by the sight of no less than 6 formidable Jag-Panther tank destroyers emerging from the mist-covered village towards them. These were among the most deadly armored vehicles Germany possessed. To make things worse, the German armor was immediately followed by some 250 infantrymen, camouflaged in white against the snow, advancing in skirmish order under protection of a heavy artillery bombardment. It was a textbook combined arms assault, and Murphy's tiny force stood directly in its path. Seeing the danger, and knowing that his understrength company possessed nothing capable of stopping all this armor, besides perhaps the Wolverine tank destroyers, he called to his men to prepare to withdraw. At the same time, he used his field telephone to call in artillery fire on the approaching enemy. The situation got worse very quickly when the rear Wolverine was struck by enemy fire, killing the commander and gunner. It began billowing smoke with the surviving crew abandoning it and running for the rear under heavy fire. The Germans were systematically dismantling Murphy's defenses. The second Wolverine, in a more exposed position, did quite well, firing continuously as it attempted to back into the safety of the tree line. Murphy recalled the disheartening sight of seeing the M10's 90mm shells striking the frontal armor of the Jag-Panthers before ricocheting off, causing no damage. The American tank destroyers were outgunned and outmatched. The situation changed again moments later when the remaining M10 left the roadway as it reversed and slid into the drainage ditch, becoming stuck with its main gun at an angle which made it useless for defense. With no way of extracting it, Sergeant Hines and his crew abandoned it, leaving Company B alone to face the onslaught. In minutes, Murphy had lost all his armored support. Now the real test would begin. Murphy, knowing his men had a better chance in the stronger line within the wood, called for his company to retire whilst he continued, in full view, to call in artillery fire to cover their withdrawal. Most officers would have retreated with their men. Murphy stayed. Company B's platoon sergeant, Colmar Pocket, described the scene perfectly. As we withdrew, hundreds of infantrymen poured out of the woods, firing automatic weapons as they came. Lieutenant Murphy stayed on at his command post under a pine tree at the edge of the woods and directed artillery fire by telephone upon the advancing tanks and infantrymen. The enemy Mark 6 tanks crashed through on both flanks, firing persistently at the lieutenant and shattering branches of trees at his side with shell fragments. In a storm of machine gun fire from the tanks, he coolly went on, telephoning fire orders. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but Murphy held his ground. The hostile tanks charged by Murphy's command post, coming within 50 yards as they passed and firing at him. But apparently they wanted to avoid the burning tank destroyer, and so didn't come any closer. With only one target visible on the field now for the German attackers, Murphy came under a continuous hail of fire. Amazingly, he stayed, firing his carbine until all his ammunition was exhausted, then moving the 10 yards to his rear to take cover behind the burning tank destroyer. This was a hugely dangerous place to be, as not only was it right in the heart of the German advance, but it was also in imminent danger of its own ammunition or fuel igniting, causing it to explode. But Murphy had spotted something the Germans hadn't. The burning Wolverine still had one working weapon, and he was about to use it in the most audacious way imaginable. Lieutenant Weiss-Pfennig, an artillery forward observer who had relocated to Company B's line once his own communications were knocked out, recalled what happened next. While we attempted to hold off the tanks with directed artillery fire and bazooka rockets, the German infantry line, consisting of 2 full-strength companies of 125 men each, surged across the open meadow in a wide arc. As they advanced, they fired their machine pistols and rifles at Lieutenant Murphy. Then Weiss-Pfennig saw Lieutenant Murphy do the bravest thing he had ever seen any man do in combat. With the Germans only 100 yards away, and still moving up on him, Murphy climbed onto the slowly burning tank destroyer and began firing the .50 caliber machine gun at them. There he was, completely exposed and silhouetted against the background of bare trees and snow, with a fire under him that threatened to blow the destroyer to bits. 88mm shells, machine gun, machine pistol, and rifle fire crashed all around him. Any rational person would have called this suicide. Here Murphy stayed, raining a shower of .50 caliber rounds into the oncoming German infantry, killing and wounding many and driving the others to ground. He was aided by fortune, too. Fearing either the imminent explosion of the tank destroyer or possibly that it might still be crewed, the German armor steered clear. Partially concealed by the smoke it was emitting, Murphy remained somewhat hidden. For the next 30 or so minutes, he held off all German attempts to move towards his position, alternating between firing and calling in artillery strikes on enemy troops, all the time standing on something which was likely to explode at any moment. In classic Murphy fashion, he would later write, "I am conscious only that the smoke and turret afford a good screen, and for the first time in 3 days, my feet are warm." Even facing death, the man found dark humor in his situation. But the Germans weren't about to give up. They were determined to silence this one-man army, no matter the cost. Unable to advance deep into the wood, and dissuaded by the occasional bazooka round and Murphy's fire, German armor paused in the fields and waited for the infantry to come forward to clear the way. From the German perspective, the devastating .50 caliber fire was now the major obstacle, and all attention switched to that. Units crept up under covering fire to try and identify and outflank the position. On 2 occasions, German tank rounds slammed into Murphy's M10, engulfing it in clouds of smoke. Both times, miraculously, Murphy reappeared and carried on firing. The Germans must have thought they were fighting a ghost. Based in this exact location, Murphy had to simultaneously fire, call in orders, avoid German artillery and tank rounds, and keep an eye out on his exposed flanks. Luckily, he managed it. Peering through the smoke of the burning Wolverine, a few moments later, he caught sight of movement just a few yards away. Swinging the .50 caliber round in the nick of time, he spotted a group of 12 men in the act of getting out of the ditch to rush his position and surely kill him. He opened up on them from a distance of just 10 yards, killing them to a man. They never had a chance. That immediate threat was gone, but things were still desperate for Murphy, who once again called back for artillery support. On the other end of the line was a radio operator, who, when asking, "How close are they?" received a legendary reply, "Just hold the phone, and I'll let you talk to one of the bastards." If it wasn't already clear just how perilous the situation was, Murphy's next coordinates for the artillery to fire on were his own position. In a few moments, U.S. shrapnel was mixing with German steel as it buzzed and clanged off the burning tank destroyer in a desperate attempt to halt the enemy attack. All his luck held. Now drenched in blood from a recent leg wound which had reopened, he fought on, hammering the hard-pressed Germans. After more than an hour of fighting against one man, they finally began to falter. But Murphy's ordeal wasn't over yet. The climax was still to come. PFC Abramski, who was watching from the Company B lines, witnessed the finale. For an hour, he held off the enemy force, single-handed, fighting against impossible odds. When his last round of ammunition was spent, Lieutenant Murphy climbed painfully down from the top of the tank destroyer and made his way back to our position. Although his wound looked really bad, he refused to wait for treatment. He reorganized the company and led them in an attack which swept the German force back into the woods they had come from. The man who had just held off an army alone was now leading a counterattack. After he had done that, he stopped for first aid right on the field, but he wouldn't take evacuation. The fight that Lieutenant Murphy put up was the greatest display of guts and courage Abramski had ever seen. There's only 1 in a million who'd be willing to stand up on a burning vehicle loaded with explosives and hold off. 250 Germans for an hour and do all that while wounded. Abramski estimated Murphy must have killed and wounded about 100 of them with the direct artillery and .50 caliber fire. Murphy himself recalled that shortly after climbing down from the M10 and making his way rearward, all the while under fire, he heard the ammunition blow on the tank destroyer. No doubt it would have killed him had he remained in the vicinity just a couple of minutes longer. It's no underestimation to say that Murphy's actions, aided by those of the artillery, were responsible for halting the German attack. According to Lieutenant Colonel Ware, they saved the remnants of Company B from being surrounded and entirely destroyed. Today, on the spot of the action stands a memorial to Audie and all the men of the 30th Division who fought and fell in the liberation of France. But Murphy's story was far from over. The world was about to learn his name. In the following days, reports of Audie's bravery flooded in, and unsurprisingly, he was recommended for, and rightly received, the highest award for gallantry available to U.S. servicemen, the Medal of Honor. It was presented to him on June 2, 1945, near Salzburg, Austria. On that day, Murphy was to receive several awards, including the Legion of Merit, presented by Lieutenant General Alexander Patch, who reportedly whispered to the equally shy Murphy, "I wonder if you're as nervous as I am." Murphy's reply, "Yes, sir. I'm afraid I am." First Lieutenant Audie Leon Murphy returned to the U.S. in August 1945, just a few days before his 21st birthday, being released from active duty the following month. He eventually accepted an appointment as captain in the National Guard in July 1950 and was recommended for major. But not having sufficient academic qualifications to hold the rank, a special board had to be convened to adjudicate the case. The following is from a memo sent to the Chief of the National Guard reviewing Captain Murphy's record. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster, Legion of Merit. Bronze Star Medal with V device and oak leaf cluster. Purple Heart with second oak leaf cluster. American Campaign Medal. European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal with 1 Silver Service Star, 3 Bronze Stars, and 1 Bronze Arrowhead. The World War II Victory Medal. The Combat Infantry Badge. The Marksman Badge with Rifle. Expert Badge with Bayonet Bar. French Forager in colors of the Croix de Guerre. French Legion of Honor, grade of Chevalier. French Croix de Guerre with Silver Star, and the Belgian Croix de Guerre with Palm. After careful consideration, it was decided that Murphy, the most decorated American serviceman of the Second World War, probably did have the qualifications. Promotion to major was confirmed, but medals couldn't heal the invisible wounds he carried. Upon returning to the States and semi-civilian life after the war, Murphy was a national celebrity, and offers soon came in, which resulted in embarking on an acting career of more than 40 feature films, including many westerns. Perhaps his most famous role was as himself in the 1955 film To Hell and Back, based on his own autobiography. Despite considerable on-screen success, Murphy was haunted by memories of his wartime experiences. He had significant troubles with PTSD and addiction, and reportedly slept for the remainder of his life with a pistol under his pillow. The warrior could never quite become a civilian. He was, though, active in veterans' activities and did significant work to support fellow servicemen. On one Veterans Day in the 1950s, Audie was asked in an interview what the most memorable day of the war was for him. His powerful response revealed the true nature of his character. "I think I was first lieutenant, and this was, I've even forgotten the date, but I was on a train going for a little rest on the Riviera for about a 3 or 4 day pass, and I heard the announcement that the war in Europe was over, and there's nothing that could top that for me." The interviewer asked, "Well then, this was your most memorable day?" It certainly was, because, as I say, those 3 years seemed much longer than they really were. And I saw a lot of good men come and go, and a lot of them, as we know, especially, and remember on this day, are still there. Murphy never forgot the men who didn't come home. They haunted him until the end. But fate had one more cruel twist in store for America's greatest hero. On the 28th of May 1971, Audie Murphy and 5 others took off from DeKalb Airport in Atlanta, Georgia, on board a twin-engine Aero Commander en route from Martinsville, Virginia. It never arrived. It later emerged that the aircraft had struck mountains in bad weather, killing all 6 on board. Audie Leon Murphy was just 45 years of age when he died. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery on Monday, the 7th of June, 1971. At Audie's earlier request, the gold lettering reserved exclusively for Medal of Honor recipients was omitted from his headstone. He preferred the plain inscription of an ordinary soldier. Remember that question from the beginning? What drives a man to climb onto a burning tank destroyer to face down an army alone? After hearing Murphy's full story, we know the answer. It wasn't recklessness. It wasn't a death wish. It was love for his men, dedication to duty, and a courage so deep it defied all logic and self-preservation. Murphy understood something most of us never will. Sometimes one person, standing in the right place at the right time with unwavering resolve, can change the course of history. He was 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 112 pounds. But on that frozen January day in 1945, Audie Murphy stood 10 feet tall. His legacy reminds us that heroism isn't about size, strength, or advantages. It's about heart, determination, and refusing to abandon those who depend on you, no matter the odds. That's a lesson we should never forget. If you found Audie Murphy's incredible story as inspiring as we did, please subscribe to our channel for more stories of extraordinary courage and the people who changed history. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another tale of the heroes who shaped our world. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that true strength comes from within. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.